Do you want to improve your deadlift? What we're going to do in this tutorial is we're going to look at how we can do that by building greater stability through the hip. So how does greater hip stability improve your deadlift? Well, number one, you get greater activation through glute maximus and the two supporting muscles, medius and minimus. If you've got greater activation through glute medius and glute minimus, they're the stabilizing muscles. If you can get those more working better, glute maximus can do what it does best, which is produce power, which is therefore then improving the deadlift by able to lift more. What it also gives you is a greater movement awareness. So you're able to comprehend what the knees are doing, get those in a fixed position. If you can get the knees in a fixed position, you can get the feet and the ankles in a better position. If you can get all of those working properly, then you're going to be in a much more effective position when it comes to both feet on the floor with a heavy weight lifting from the bottom to the top in that deadlift. And we're going to do it in a simple sort of three-step process where we're going to look at some simple prerequisites that we can get into place that can start to build the greater hip stability, and then some exercises that we can build on top of that, which will then enhance that stability. So when you go back to a deadlift or a heavier deadlift, your hips are going to be functioning that much more effectively when you lift that new heavy weight. Step one is just having the prerequisites. Number one is having that Romanian deadlift or deadlift position with both feet on the floor. So we can get down into that position. I'll talk more about that in a second. And then the second one is then a single leg stance. So just being able to balance on one leg for a period of time. Once we've got those in place, then we're ready to take it on to steps 2 and steps 3, where we start building in some exercises which are going to not only develop the movement of the hip, but also the stability of the hip. So with regards to the position, I'm just going to use this kettlebell here. All we're focusing on, number one, is that we've got, so the knees aren't looking to bend or actively bend. They're sort of passively bending because the hips are going back. So the shins basically should stay vertical. So they stay almost vertical. My hips are back, my body's over. My hips are also above my knee. If we start coming down into here, we're basically coming into a squat. So we keep the hips above the knees, and that is our basic deadlift position. We also want that neutral posture through here, so we need that good range of movement through the hip. So we've got all of that in place. So what we can then do is come from here, and that is essentially our deadlift position. Obviously, I would be using a heavier weight, but again, for the purposes of this, we're just going to stick with a nice, easy, light weight. The second thing is the single leg stance, because when we are here, obviously we've created a closed loop, which is essentially stabilizing the hip. So these two legs are keeping the hips in position. What we need to do is we need to get on to one leg, because that's going to start to show us, is there stability more in the right or the left or the left or the right or whatever. So we just use the single leg stance. So what we want to be able to do is get into here. So again, we're just lifting into this sort of position, and we're just going to hold for 10-20 seconds. So these are kind of our prerequisites for going on to steps 2 and 3. If we can't get into that position, and if we can't hold this for at least 20 seconds on both legs, then we aren't ready for steps 2 and 3. So we need to develop these first. But let's just say I can do 20, I've got that position, I can do 20 seconds here, and then you can do 20 seconds there. And we're stable. So it's not like we're just hanging on, it's like, oh, I haven't put my foot down, oh. We're up, we're solid, we're not moving, we can relax here for a prolonged period of time. So that would be the prerequisites. So what we'll now do is, now that we've got step 1 in place, we're going to move on to step 2. Step 2 is basically a progression of step 1. So what we're going to do now is we're going to continue the single leg theme, because that, when we get onto single leg, we've got this knee has got to be controlled, because that shows that the hip and the ankle is doing their job. If we're all over the place on one leg, these aren't doing their job and they need sorting out. So what we're going to do is, very simply, it is a single leg with the kettlebell, but supported single leg Romanian deadlift. So that's one of the exercises. The first exercise we're going to do, which in some respects is a bit of a prerequisite to that one, is going from here and then back down onto one knee. So we're stepping back onto one knee, because what this is doing, this is taking that single leg stance and just enhancing it by taking back and then down. So you can see, and then as I come up, I've got that single leg stance to bring it back into this position. And again, we can do that on both sides. And again, that wants to be smooth. So we want to be able to take that movement and down. So we're not worried about the Romanian deadlift movement at the moment, because that will come later where we get into this sort of position on the single leg stance. All we're focused on at the moment is just the hips being controlled. So by going from this position in the single leg stance, we've got that sort of minimal skill level because we're just stood up, and then we're just taking it and putting it on a little bit and just adding a little bit of movement and going through. So what we would then do is a single leg supported Romanian deadlift. Now again, we can use a weight if you want to, so you can come into this position and just up and down. So again, the movement of the hip, so if you look at me on a side profile, the movement is almost the same. The shin stays vertical, the hip's gone back, the body's in position, tilted over, and then we come forward. But again, what we're doing here is we're supporting with this. What you can do as well, if you haven't got a broom handle or a stick like that, you can just use a door frame, the back of a seat, whatever it might be. But again, it's just there to develop that ability to hold the hips in a stable position, which in some respects is shown by the knee staying nice and centered. So that would be step 2, taking it from that single leg stance down onto one knee into that sort of position, and then using the supported single leg Romanian deadlift. Again, you can do that body weight or weighted. Step number 3 is just taking that a step further and just progressing it on a little bit further. So what we're now doing is we're taking away all of the support. So we've got 2 exercises. One, we're going to use this as our guide. So the kettlebell is going to be my guide. It can be a dumbbell, can be a sofa, can be a chair, can be anything. So all we want is, again, it's that same movement, single leg, coming forward, but now I'm reaching for that dumbbell. So again, I've still got a guide which can help me get back into that position. Again, I can change the legs, reach back, ooh, and there it is. And hold that position. So again, it's a little bit more of a challenge, but what it's there to do is to get me up into that single leg stance, get glute medius, glute minimus, and glute maximus working all at the same time, going through that movement, so it's keeping it mobile and it's keeping it stable. What we can then do is basically take everything away and just say, right, now it's time for single leg Romanian deadlift. So we then go into that and then come up. So the movement, again, is exactly the same. Ooh. The movement is exactly the same as the normal deadlift. The only difference being, I've got one leg on the floor. So that is a simple 3-step process to stabilize your hip. Then what will happen when you've got both hips working independently, when you put them back together, the idea would be the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. So the sum of its parts being this side is stable, this side is stable, you put the 2 together and it becomes like extra stable. So that is what we would be looking to try and create over these 3 steps. If you want help with your deadlift, could be a squat, could be a front squat, back squat. If you want help with those, click the link below, go through to my mobility program page, enter your details, fill out the consultation, and we'll get you booked in for a 2-hour workshop here where we'll work on hip mobility, hip stability based on the deadlift. So we'll go through full consultation, full assessment, and then a workshop getting the hips more mobile, more stable, building in some exercises like we've just created, building in some exercises where we can create that mobility and stability, ready for when you then go back to a heavier deadlift or a heavier squat or a regular squat or deadlift, which will then stabilize the hips and mobilize the hips.